webinar. Yay, got it. And Megan, there's people still in the waiting room. I think you have to keep admitting them. So we're going to be recording this webinar and we will post it on our website afterwards. And we're also going to be posting the PowerPoint slides on our website afterwards if you just want to look through those. So please, as we're going, you can enter questions in the chat, and Megan Cooper, our South Coast Regional Manager, will be monitoring the chat and helping us respond to questions. If they're clarifying questions, we'll try to address them as we go. And we should have enough time at the end to cover, bigger questions. We do ask everybody to stay muted when not talking and to keep your comments constructive and respectful in the chat. If you have any technical difficulties, let Megan know in the chat and she will attempt to help you.
Amy, I'm sorry to interrupt. It might be because you are the host that you need to turn on the transcriptions. I've been looking around for that. Okay, I'll keep looking and I apologize to the person who asked for those.
I don't know how to do that.
Okay.
Sorry. If somebody knows how to turn on transcriptions in Zoom, please let us know. This is not a Zoom webinar, by the way. This is just a straight up Zoom meeting. That might be part of the problem. So today we're going to be talking about the Conservancy's strategic plan and funding situation. I'm going to cover those two items. And then Joel and Marilyn are going to be focusing on our grant application process and how to work with us to apply for funding for projects that fit within the Conservancy's objectives. We are not going to be covering our Explore the Coast or Coastal Stories grant programs in this webinar. So those programs, Explore the Coast and Coastal Stories, have annual requests for proposals, RFPs, separate from this general Coastal Conservancy process. And there are resources and recorded webinars on our website to learn more about Explore the Coast and Coastal Stories. So I'm basically, if you're on the if you're trying to fly to explore the coast, you're on the wrong flight. So I just want to let you know that. So next slide, Joel. And as people join us, add your name, organization, location into the chat. And welcome everybody. We have a much larger audience than we had anticipated, which is terrific. So the State Coastal Conservancy's vision is of a beautiful, restored, and accessible coast for current and future generations of Californians. And we act with others, and that is all of you. So thank you for joining us today. We don't do any of our work alone. We do it in partnership. We work along the entire coast, in the 9-county Bay Area, in coastal watersheds, in the jurisdiction of the Santa Ana River Conservancy, and most recently added the Great Redwood Trail in the North Coast. So we have a large jurisdiction, and about 75% of California's population lives within it. Next slide. We are in the process now of finalizing our 2023 through 2027 strategic plan. The Conservancy Board, we anticipate, will adopt this 5-year strategic plan on December 1st. And thanks to everyone who submitted comments over the past year or participated in meetings about the strategic plan. This plan lays out our vision, goals, and measurable objectives. And we will report on our progress meeting those objectives annually to the Conservancy Board. The plan was developed in the context of 3 major drivers, and I'll touch on each of these drivers in the next few slides. But they are addressing inequity, the climate crisis, and funding, which is fortunately at the state level matching the urgency of the moment. And more in a couple slides on the Conservancy funds. But I do want to point out that state funding is being distributed through many agencies and departments within natural resources. And there's a 30 by 30 webinar series, discussions with many different agencies and departments managing funds within resources. That's a helpful tool for learning about other agencies' funding. Today, we're just going to be talking about the Coastal Conservancy's funding. The key strategies for implementation of the goals in our strategic plan include implementing existing state and regional plans. So that includes the Pathways to 30 by 30 and other state and regional plans. Accelerating action, particularly on projects that have been in the planning stage for years, if not decades, on the California coast. And building capacity and investing in meaningful engagement through supporting community-based groups in leading or engaging in projects. Next slide. So our strategic plan is divided into 5 major goals. The first is prioritizing equity. And within that goal, we have 4 different objectives. The first is that at least 40% of our funding will benefit systemically excluded communities. And that term is defined in our strategic plan. I'm gonna read it so you understand it. It is broader than, say, disadvantaged communities, which was a term we used in our last strategic plan. Systemically excluded communities include, but are not limited to, Black, Latino, Indigenous and Native American, Asian American and Pacific Islander, and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, LGBTQ+ persons, persons with disabilities, persons who live in rural areas, low-income communities, non-English speakers, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty, pollution burden, or inequality. The other objectives within the prioritized equity goal include returning power to tribes, so doing projects in partnership with tribes or even land back projects, supporting systemically excluded communities through community engagement and technical assistance, and incorporating workforce development in our projects. The second goal is Enjoy the Coast, which includes our Explore the Coast program grants, which again are not being covered in this webinar. We have an annual RFP for those grants. Our Coastal Stories program, same story as the Explore the Coast grants. Expanding accessibility for people with disabilities, building trails, recreation facilities and amenities, enhancing piers and waterfronts, and our Explore the Coast overnight program, which is to increase lower cost overnight accommodations on the coast. Our third goal is protect and restore the coast. And again, the word coast is our entire jurisdiction. Just want to make sure that's clear. So protect and restore the coast, and the objectives include conserving land, so fee title or conservation easement acquisitions, restoring or enhancing habitats, protecting and enhancing working lands such as farm and ranch land, and cutting green tape to move our restoration work forward more expeditiously. Our fourth goal is our Climate Ready program, and within that, our focus is on sea level rise adaptation projects, particularly nature-based adaptation, wildfire resilience projects, and multi-benefit nature-based climate adaptation. And finally, our organizational goals include supporting our staff and transparency about the work that we do. Next slide. So now on to the funding picture. There's $700 million in this year's budget for the Coastal Conservancy. This demonstrates a really significant commitment to coastal resilience at the state level. To break that down a bit, about half of it, or exactly half of it, 350 million is for climate resilience on the coast, and that is pretty broadly defined. 160 million for sea level rise resilience, and out of that, 120 million is for nature-based sea level rise resilience. 50 million for acquisitions that allow for nature-based solutions to climate change. 10 million for wildfire resilience specifically. And 100 million is for priority geographies or projects. So that includes the Santa Ana River, Santa Monica Bay, Eel and Russian rivers, and several very specific projects. We do anticipate another 150 million in FY 23-24 for climate resilience on the coast. So now I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn and Joel to discuss applying to the Conservancy for funding.
Great. So now we'll provide some brief information about the application process and new resources that the Conservancy has developed to assist potential grantees. And as Amy mentioned, the applications may be submitted on an ongoing rolling basis, and so they'll be accepted and evaluated when they are received. It's generally a two-step process to apply, but if needed, applicants can request a technical assistance consultation with the regional manager covering their project area to discuss project eligibility. This can be a simple email contact to the regional manager with a short elevator pitch of the project idea first to get feedback, or scheduling a brief call to discuss the project details. This can be really beneficial, especially if there's any concern about basic eligibility or project type being a good fit with the Coastal Conservancy's strategic plan goals and funding priorities. The regional manager can provide helpful feedback to assist the applicant in deciding whether the project concept and team is developed well enough, whether the lead entity and project goals are eligible, and if it's beneficial to spend time on preparing a pre-application. But in many cases, people may choose to go directly to submitting a pre-application as the most efficient first step. The pre-application will be reviewed by the regional manager and staff, who will reply within 60 days. If a pre-application meets the Conservancy's eligibility criteria and there's available Conservancy funding for the project, applicants will be invited to submit a full application. The Conservancy will again respond within 60 days on whether a grant award will be recommended. Our staff will evaluate applications based on the project selection criteria. You may be asked to participate in an application interview and/or a site visit to provide additional information during the review process. All of this is so that we can work with applicants in order to best understand the local environmental and community details as we review a wide diversity of project types. We want to support partners and help all types and sizes of entities in succeeding with applying for our funds. The regional managers are listed here, and contact information can be found on our website. Next slide. So who is eligible for Coastal Conservancy grants? That includes public agencies, including local, state, and federal agencies, federally recognized tribes, nonprofits with 501c3 status, and non-federally recognized tribes and others via fiscal sponsor. There are typical grant amounts of $200,000 to $5 million, but there's no set minimum or maximum that you can apply for. The allowable project activities, as Amy started to mention, include land acquisitions, planning of all types, which can include feasibility studies, design planning, and permitting, as well as community engagement. And then we also fund implementation projects. So that can include project execution of all types, construction work, as well as workforce development and monitoring and adaptive management. Next slide. To be competitive for funding, projects need to be able to make strong linkages to our strategic plan goals and our project selection criteria, which I'll discuss in the next slide. But these are some of the examples of project types that we do fund: land acquisitions and conservation easements, habitat restoration and enhancement, whether it's planning, design, or implementation, climate, sea level rise, and wildfire resilience, nature-based adaptation, waterfront access and resilience planning, and multi-benefit projects. Next slide. We also fund public access to the coast and public input and involvement in project development and implementation. This includes tribally led projects, including land return and acquisitions, trails and recreational facilities and amenities, lower cost overnight accommodations, and projects of all types to expand accessibility to the coast. We wanted to highlight a few of the project activities that can be funded and that we're have an increasing focus on in our strategic plan. That includes community engagement and involvement and co-design of projects. So not just giving the community input, but ensuring integration of community input into the design and community leadership in the project itself. We also are interested to fund workforce development if it's connected to a specific project. And this can include environmental work trainings, apprenticeships, and job opportunities for local community members to get engaged. Next slide. Conservancy staff have prepared new resources and guidance to clarify the application process and streamline the steps to applying for our grants. We want to help make the process efficient at each step for grantees and partners that have limited time and may need clearer guidance on what the Coastal Conservancy funds and how our grant process requirements work. We're committed to increasing the reach and accessibility to Conservancy grants, and we want to further engage local communities and support community-led efforts. So some key new resources on our website include a new grant application guide, pre-application and full application templates, and links to other resources, including technical assistance webinars. The regional managers and staff are available to give feedback on initial project ideas in order to help determine eligibility and fit with available funding and avoid the need to submit a pre-application if the project won't be considered. The shorter pre-application form is designed to be more straightforward to complete, share high-level information on the proposed project, and confirm whether a project is a good fit before spending the time developing a full application. Next slide. So the new grant application guide is on our website and the link is here. It provides step-by-step instructions on completing a pre or full application for the Coastal Conservancy. You can use this guide as you go through your application to help answer questions and provide the appropriate information. And this guide includes a full overview of all of the main steps, the templates to use, and an application checklist to help make sure that all required information is included in your submittals. The guide also includes links to our strategic plan and funding priorities and additional resources and technical assistance webinars here at these links. This is all also on the grants page of our website. Next slide. So I just wanted to briefly show the project selection criteria, which are key to consider in developing any kind of project application. We look at whether the project is a good investment of state resources, whether it helps the Conservancy accomplish our strategic plan, includes a serious effort to engage tribes, provides benefits that will be sustainable or resilient over the project lifespan, projects that deliver multiple benefits and significant positive impact, and they were or will be planned with meaningful community engagement and broad community support. Next slide. We also wanted to highlight a few key grant requirements to be aware of. These are reimbursable grants. You do the work first and then invoice the Conservancy, and that can be from monthly to quarterly. All grants must be authorized by the Coastal Conservancy Board, and we have 5 meetings per year, so it's important to plan carefully for those. After board authorization, a grant agreement is signed by the Conservancy and grantee. You'll need a resolution from your governing body to accept the grant and sign the grant agreement. And you provide a task-based work program and budget, including for subcontractors, which clearly helps describe the work, the schedule, and the deliverables of the grant. There's about a $2 million insurance coverage that's typically required for most grants, but you can talk about that with the regional managers in terms of the scale and activities that are specific to your project. But it is important to be aware of these requirements because you cannot start work on the grant until there's an agreement in place and all conditions of the grant have been approved. So now I'll turn it over to Joel, who share a bit more about guidance on the pre-application process.
Thank you, Marilyn. So I'm going to just walk through the pre-application and share some tips on how you would prepare that. As Marilyn said, it is a fairly brief pre-application that can avoid the more extensive work and information requirements of a full proposal if your project isn't a good fit or isn't ready to go yet. So I'm going to start by talking about the project summary. That's our first question here, your elevator pitch. And my top tip for you for that is that you want to be specific about what you're going to do, really be specific about your project. So here is an example of a one-sentence project summary elevator pitch that does a good job of answering who, what, where, and why. And I want to thank the Big Sur Land Trust for letting us use this example. So this sentence says the Big Sur Land Trust will acquire the 73-acre Car Lake property as a first step to creating an urban oasis within the city of Salinas that will provide recreation, flood control, wetland habitat, and build climate change resiliency. So this, in just one sentence, answers the question, who is doing this project, the Big Sur Land Trust? What are they doing? They're acquiring the 73-acre property. Where is it? In the city of Salinas. And why are they doing it? To create an urban oasis with multiple benefits. There is a separate section in the pre-application to talk about project need, the why, but it's great to include a quick summary of the why right up front in your elevator pitch. So now I'm going to move on and talk about the project needs and project tasks sections. Let's start with the project need. And I'm just going to use an example from the living shoreline in San Diego Bay. So the project need, you have a couple paragraphs for this section. And we want you to start with, again, being very specific about what's the problem in your project location, your project area. So in this case, the applicant is telling us that there's been significant shoreline erosion at this site over recent decades, and that there's threatened species and natural communities that are in decline. We want you to follow that by showing us that the community has also identified this as a problem. And community can have different meanings. So in this example, I just threw in many different kinds of community, the city, the neighborhood association, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and their identification of different problems at this site: shoreline erosion, flooding, damage from storm events, and declining populations of a listed species. But of course, you might not check all these boxes. Just give us the information for what works for your project in terms of wider community identifying the issue. And then we also would like you to put this in regional needs. So start out by being very specific, but then put it into a regional context for us. And in this case, this project identified that this is a problem around San Diego Bay. And of course, it's a problem in other parts of the California coast as well, that shallow water and salt marsh habitats have been lost to development. Sea level rise is increasing the vulnerability of aquatic communities and inshore areas to flooding and extreme weather. So that is the need section. And now we're going to talk about project tasks. So you can see right in the template for project tasks, the pre-application template gives you some examples of the types of tasks that we would expect might be involved in different types of projects: acquisition, planning, or implementation. And again, we want you to be specific about the project tasks, but you don't have to be incredibly specific at the pre-application stage. You can, we just want to get a good general idea of what you're going to be doing, and you can provide more details at the full proposal stage. You'll see also in the template here, it's noted that if long-term management is going to be applicable to your project, that we would like you to include a brief discussion of how that is going to happen. So here's an example of a task list that you might have at the pre-application stage. So you can see it's not overly specific, but it does give us an idea that you're going to be doing technical studies, design and engineering, environmental compliance, and engagement and outreach. You will also be using this same list in the project schedule section of the pre-application, which is question number 6. And there we're going to ask for you to give us estimated start dates and end dates. We understand that the project schedule is going to depend on when you get funding. You can't start if you don't have any money. So you can give us that schedule based on when you would, starting from when you would have funding available to go, and then tell us the completion date for this task will be 12 months after funding is received. Please be realistic with your timeline. It's important to us to understand when the project will really be ready to get started. And now let's talk briefly about the budget. This is the budget template, and here's an example of a summary budget. So a couple things to remember about the budget. First of all, you should make sure that the tasks you include correspond exactly to the tasks that you identified in the project tasks section. The other thing is that you can use round numbers in this budget summary. We don't expect you to have figured out everything down to the dollars and cents at this stage, and we know that things will change over the course of preparing the full application and then implementing the project. This is also a good place to show matching funds. You can see this column that says other fund sources. I want to remind everyone that we do not require matching funds. But if you do have them, it's good to let us know. It's great to leverage our funds when possible, but we do not require them. And I'll also just say you don't have to include them in this table because we don't need you to break them out by task the way they are here. So you can just include that information in the narrative. But if you do have matching funds, let us know. So that is the summary budget. And then if your pre-application looks like a good fit and the timing looks good and we have funding that could work for the project, then we would ask you for a full proposal. I'm not going to go through the full proposal in detail today because we don't have time to do that. But we want to make sure we have time to answer questions. But this slide does list some of the things that we ask for, in the full proposal. So we're going to ask for a lot more information. We're looking at 10 pages plus attachments, although there's no required length. That's just kind of an approximate number that you might need. We're going to ask for project activities, qualitative and quantitative project outcomes, specific linkages to the strategic plan and funding priorities and our project selection criteria, as Marilyn discussed. You're going to talk about your capacity to carry out this project, who owns the site, how long-term maintenance of the site will work. You go through the tasks and schedule in more detail, talk about permits and environmental compliance, provide us with a more detailed cost estimate, and also maps and design plans if that's applicable for an implementation project. So the top tip for this one, Marilyn mentioned we have this application guide on our website, and that will be a great resource that will walk you through all these sections and explain what we're looking for. So be sure to take advantage of that. I also want to let you know that we have a grantee manual on our website. So Marilyn hit on some of the things that are important to know about what the conditions of a grant would be in our granting process in terms of reimbursable grants and having to get us a work program and execute a grant agreement, all those things. We have a manual on our website under resources for grantees that gives a very detailed description of how our grants work. You don't need to read it all when you're applying, but if you have specific questions about how the grants are going to work that are going to be important for you, figuring out whether you can manage our grant from us or what you're going to need to do to be able to do that, it's a good resource. I also want to say you can reach out to us if you aren't sure about something in the application. We're always happy to help, but realistically, it may take us a little while to get back to you. And in terms of how to submit your proposal, it's pretty straightforward. You just use those templates on the website for the pre-application or the application, and then just send us an email to this grants@scc.ca.gov address. So don't mail us a paper copy, just attach your application to an email. Make sure to keep a copy for your records. And you should only send us the items requested in the checklist. There's an application checklist for the full application, and then the pre-application template walks through what we need. So at this point, don't send us any supplementary materials like PowerPoint presentations or letters of support. We might ask for those later, but when you're submitting your application, don't have to send those supplementary materials. And as I mentioned, there's an application checklist for the full application that's very useful. I do want to also say our templates that you can download are Microsoft Word templates. And we recognize that not everyone has access to Microsoft Word. So if you don't, then what you can do is download the template and then open it with a free program like Google Docs and fill it out in that program, and then you should be able to email the application that you prepared using that free program. So that's the story.
Say that back as, sorry, Joe, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, please go ahead.
You would save it as a Word doc and email us that doc.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amy.
Don't send us a link to a Google Doc.
Okay. So I can see we whipped through this material pretty quickly. So we should have a lot of time for questions now, but that concludes our presentation. And I'll just keep it open in case people want to go back to a specific slide, unless you tell me, Amy, unless you want me to stop sharing the screen.
I think this is great.
Maybe stop sharing, Joel, just so we can see all 300 people.
Yes, this has been amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, everyone, for coming. Just a few things. I'm sorry if you got let in late. We maxed out at 300. So as people were dropping off, I was then able to bring more people into the meeting. But just to remind everyone, this has been recorded and it will be posted on our website. I also apologize, I wasn't able to turn on the live captioning, but please contact me directly if you need closed captioning of the recorded presentation. I'll try to figure that out for you. Okay, so we had so many fantastic questions coming in. I'm going to try to go back through a few of them that I was gathering along the way and ask the group. And then if we get toward the end and I didn't ask your question, feel free to pipe in. Okay, we had well, real quickly, there were a number of questions that came in about educational programs and Explore the Coast program. So that those projects we aren't talking about today, but I encourage you to please go to the Explore the Coast program website or webpage on our website and reach out to our Explore the Coast staff, who will be happy to answer all of your questions about our educational programs and Explore the Coast programs and that kind of a thing. The first question was, can we submit multiple pre-proposals? And I'm going to go ahead and say yes. The answer to that question is yes. And do you need to get approval from the regional manager in order to submit a pre-proposal? The answer to that is no. You can go ahead and just send us a pre-proposal without contacting the regional manager if you would like to do that. If you would like to contact the regional manager first, that is also great. The second question for the group, do you fund research needed for designing restoration projects? Anyone like to jump in?
I would say, and Marilyn probably could chime in as well. I would not say that we fund like pure research, but we certainly fund, the technical studies needed to design projects. Marilyn?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, making sure to focus on the operational aspects, what's directly needed for the associated implementation project is key. I think we certainly recognize that more effort is needed with more innovative climate adaptation, sea level rise, wildfire resilience, techniques that are under development. And so that can be included, but it can't be to the level of published research papers and topics that don't directly lead to the implementation.
Great, thank you. There was a question about, do we fund natural infrastructure projects like beach dunes? The answer to that is absolutely yes. We love those kinds of coast resilience projects. And then related to that, there was a question about, would we fund English ivy removal to protect redwoods? I would say for that question, you should reach out to the regional manager for where your project is located. I think that it really depends on the project and how the invasive plant control is really integrated into the restoration project. I don't know, Mimi, Marilyn, and Joel, if you want to jump in on that, or if that's okay. Okay, great. There was a question about, how does reimbursement work on acquisition projects? Joel, do you want to take that?
Sure. Acquisition projects are sort of an exception to the reimbursement rule. So for an acquisition project, we have a number of conditions that we have to meet in terms of having an appraisal done and approved, and other documents related to the acquisition that have to be all wrapped up and reviewed for our due diligence. And then at that point, before the property is acquired, there's a special way of invoicing us, and we would send our grant funds into the escrow account for the acquisition to close. So that's not a case where you have to front the money for the acquisition. Yeah, that's a good point. Good question.
Great, thank you. This was a question from Michael Nelson. I'm wondering if this is the Michael Nelson that we used to work with on the San Diego River. The question is, will we still work on working waterfronts? And yes, the answer to that is yes. It's still part of our enabling legislation, and it is still something that we would like to continue to help build resilient communities and working waterfront communities along the coast. Are there geographic restrictions on our wildfire work? Amy, do you want to take that one?
Well, in general, with our wildfire resilience money that we received this year and last year, it's our entire jurisdiction. So the coast, coastal watersheds, the 9-county Bay Area. So it's that map I showed at the beginning. We have received some regional fire resilience funding that does have, more, like I believe there was a Central Coast block grant, but our wildfire resilience money, it's broad.
Thank you. There was a question about, when do costs start counting on the grant? Is it during the after the grant award or after the grant agreement execution? So you can start billing project-related funds to the Conservancy grant after the grant agreement is executed and the conditions precedent to beginning work are completed. Such things like having a completed work program, having an acknowledgement plan completed, having the insurance requirements completed, and that can all be found through the grantee manual online. And feel free to reach out if you have more specific questions about that.
Yeah,
okay, so
I just to add to that, I think it is important this came up in one of the slides, but don't start work that you want reimbursed by the Conservancy until you receive an email or letter from the project manager saying that you can start work under the grant. There will be a letter / email that says that.
Yes, thanks, Amy. I'm going to jump over to the new questions that I see in the chat. Where can we find out information about specific funding allocations? Looks like there was $100 million funding allocation that somebody is interested in. So I would say reach out to the regional manager that covers the project area where you're interested in. So this person had asked about Russian River project. So that would be our North Coast Regional Manager, Karen Gear, and she can help you sort through sort of the more specific funding pots that we have and if they would be applicable to your project.
Megan, I just wanted to pop in.
Yeah.
Marilyn, I forgot to emphasize, I think that's really key, that applicants don't need to worry about deciding what program type or fund source your project may fit under. We will look at that on the back end on our side and then communicate with you about that, whether it's a good fit and for which program type and fund source.
Thanks for pointing that out, Marilyn. Here, you can stay on the line. I have a question for you. Do you fund post-construction vegetation management and monitoring?
We do. So we certainly, can fund all stages of a project. So planning, permitting, construction or implementation, and then monitoring. Again, I would say similar to the research question, that monitoring needs to be directly related to the implementation project and analyzing the outcomes, maintaining that project. So it does have a limit to how much monitoring, but we certainly can fund those activities.
Thank you. Here's a question. What is the grant performance period? And as a follow-up, will the grantee be required to maintain the property for a period of time after project completion? And how will that be determined? Did you want to take that, Amy?
The time period for the grant? Yeah, I mean, that really depends on the time frame for your project. So please let us know the schedule for your project. We try to be as flexible as possible, but our funding sources have different expiration dates. So that often influences when, how long we can be funding a project for. So it's really important to be upfront about your anticipated schedule, and then we can work with you on the term of the grant agreement, depending on your schedule and our funding sources.
And Amy, is it correct to say that we definitely try to be flexible, but often our funding sources might have a 3-year term, so that might be kind of the easy thing for us to work with a project with a term like that. And we can figure out ways to be flexible, but that's sort of the straightforward kind of baseline situation that we find ourselves in with our funding.
Yeah, and I think this relates to another question about, can you apply for planning and implementation simultaneously? And typically, no. Typically, we would need to fund planning first, which would include CEQA, and then we could consider funding for implementation. But our board has to make CEQA findings to fund an implementation project. So we definitely can't fund planning and implementation if you have not completed CEQA.
But we do frequently fund those as 2 separate phases. And the
Right.
other thing that I think was in the question too was what would be the term of the agreement or how long do you have to maintain something? Was there something like that, Megan?
Yeah, it was asking about how long the property where the project took place would need to be protected.
Right, and I can take a stab at that, which is just to say that, you know, we hope that the projects that we're funding will be useful for a very long time, and we would expect that they would be operated and maintained for the acquisition purpose for as long as they're useful lifetime. But we use a 20-year term in our grant agreements that involve implementation and capital improvements, and then the grant agreements will have a section saying, you know, we expect you to operate and maintain the project for the purpose of the project was done in the first place over that 20-year term. And we come out and monitor our projects every 5 years to just check in on things. So that's the basic answer, is 20 years.
Thank you, Joel. There was a question, is there a resource for locating individuals or agencies who help very small nonprofits find and obtain funding? I would say, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help connect you and help find funding for your project. We really want to try to help support very small nonprofits and community-based organizations to either access our funding or perhaps find other funding for your project.
And on that note, Megan, somebody sent me a question about supporting smaller community-based organizations with limited resources and the difficulty of that with reimbursable grants. We do have a way of fronting money to projects and grantees that meet specific criteria. So if the reimbursement part is absolutely impossible, and you can make a really good case, then we will consider fronting of some of the funds. But we do that on a limited basis.
Thanks, Amy. I see a question in here about how frequently you would invoice. We ask that you invoice no more than monthly, but at least quarterly. But then the question also said, could we invoice by task? And for that, I would say that we do try to have flexibility there, but this is something that you would work with the regional manager on through your grant proposal and grant agreement process. We got to the phasing question. Do we need to know exactly what land we want to acquire before applying? The answer to that is yes. I'm going to say yes to that. Do you want to say something different, Amy?
Sorry, Megan, I would just say,
go.
We could fund a planning process. I mean, if you are interested in, you know, land acquisition for certain purposes in a given area, you know, you can reach out to us. There might be opportunities.
Thanks, Amy. Yes, we can fund projects on federal properties. Depends on the project. Please reach out and let us know more about the project. There's a question about, Amy, this is to you. Is the Conservancy interested in funding beach nourishment?
I think we'd be, we're supportive of beach nourishment if it is sustainable. So I would say we're not going to fund beach nourishment if it is something that needs to be happening, you know, frequently and is being done primarily for economic purposes. But if it's part of, you know, nature-based restoration activities and is sustainable, we would consider it. And certainly, you know, we do beneficial use of dredge sediment and beneficial use of construction sediment as part of projects, and trying to reconnect local watersheds to the shore. Yeah. There was another question I think we skipped over, Megan, about would you fund public educational programs on the coast? Yes, we do. That's our Explore the Coast program. So definitely look that up on our website. We do an annual RFP. And can you clarify what nature-based adaptation refers to? And I'm going to put that one on Marilyn. You have to define nature-based adaptation.
There are many definitions, but generally the concept is using natural habitats to achieve biological and physical goals. So much like a seawall or a levee can provide shoreline protection, eelgrass beds, marshes, beaches, natural habitats have great ability to provide shoreline protection in a more natural way, as well as also restoring habitat and function.
Great. I am skipping around a little, so do let me know if I missed anything. What was the one that, I think we answered this, but I just want to answer it again. Can you fund CEQA, environmental review, and permitting? The answer is yes, we do fund the planning phase of restoration projects. We just fund it in 2 separate phases, planning first, CEQA environmental review, and once that is complete, then we can fund on the ground implementation after that. There was one that I missed. Expand on how grant approvals relate to the Conservancy Board meetings. So when you submit your grant and Conservancy staff have agreed to present your project and recommend your project to our board for funding. So your grant is not formally approved until the Conservancy Board approves your funding at a public meeting. And then from there, we enter into the grant agreement and satisfy the conditions so that you can begin your project. Our meetings are, I think we have 6 a year. And the schedule is a little different every year, but we try to meet about every other month. And yes, we approve. So that means we approve lots of projects at each of our board meetings. I'm just skipping some that I think we've answered.
Amy,
There's
we're
one
indicating
that, can your
5.
funding sources be used to establish a long-term management endowment? And the answer to that is no.
Let's see. Are the scoring criteria available for pre or full proposals? We don't have scoring criteria per se. The grant applications are reviewed based on our project eligibility and project selection criteria, which are laid out in the grant application, and is essentially how well each of the projects helps accomplish those project selection criteria. And we'd be happy to talk through how your project meets those criteria for each of the different proposals. Are non-nature-based activities eligible, such as design and construction of a bike path that connects to the coast? Yes, absolutely. Public access projects are definitely eligible. Not all projects necessarily will be able to fall into the sort of nature-based bin of types of projects, but that being said, we're always looking to try to build more resilient projects, projects that incorporate multiple benefits, such as habitat restoration and preservation, in addition to providing public access to the coast where we can. So it depends on the project. Will you consider habitat gardening programs on public school properties? Yes, I think we funded a number of those types of projects through our Explore the Coast program, but feel free to reach out to the Explore the Coast team on that. It sounds like that might be something that's a better fit for some other different state funding opportunities that we could connect you to.
Yeah, on the urban greening, schoolyard greening projects, the Natural Resources Agency has received significant funding for urban greening in this year's budget. So I would encourage you to check out the California Natural Resources Agency website and look into their programs. We have done those in the past, but given the fact that Resources has funding specifically for urban greening, I don't think it's going to be a huge focus of our work. And somebody asked whether our climate resilience funds can be used for acquisitions. And yes, yeah, the climate resilience funding is a very broad source of funding.
There's a question that says the legislature points to the Coastal Conservancy funding as their solution to sea level rise for coastal communities. Will these grants fund coastal flood protection infrastructure to protect from sea level rise communities? I think to protect from sea level rise, both of economic importance and disadvantaged communities. Do you want to take that question, Amy?
Yeah, I'm reading that question. The sea level rise adaptation funding, it's about 160 million. 120 million of that is specifically for nature-based sea level rise adaptation. So the project would need to have a nature-based element to it. The remaining funds, about 37.5 million, is broader and talks about ports, waterfronts, and ecosystems. So yes, those funds could be used to support coastal flood protection infrastructure. I think that's the short story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Joel, I'm going to give this one to you. Could you tell us a little about your priorities with regards to projects in upper watershed areas? Does the proposal need to show potential impacts on the coast and ocean?
Yeah, good question. It's true that most of our work tends to be located closer to the coast, with the exception of our wildfire resilience projects have often been in upper watershed areas as well. But generally speaking, we do like to have the further we're working from the coast, the more we need to make a case for the importance of the project for coastal resources. And one of the linkages that, just as an example, that is often made would be for salmonid habitat, for example, for like an anadromous fish species, and providing enhancing or restoring habitat or passage to upper watershed, although CDFW has a lot of funding for that as well. But that's just an example. Yeah, so it is good if you're working in the upper watershed to be able to make the connection to resources closer to the actual coast. But don't rule it out until you can always check in with us about it.
Thank you. So I note that we've come to the end of our meeting time, and I see that there are 48 chat messages that I haven't gotten to yet. I really apologize that we weren't able to get to all of your questions. I think maybe we can talk internally about if there's a way to have another sort of open Q&A session like this one, so that we can help address some of the questions that we weren't able to get to today. You can always reach out to us individually. So the contact information for the regional managers is on the Coastal Conservancy website under the grants page. You can reach out to us directly with your follow-up questions. And if we're not the right people, we'll make sure to find someone who can get your questions answered. So Amy, with that, I don't know if you want us to wrap up here or keep going?
Yes, sorry, I was just scrolling through the questions to make sure we're not missing. I tried to answer a few in the chat that were pretty straightforward. Yeah, pre-proposed, okay. And the video and the PowerPoint is going to be posted on our website. And again, you can reach out to regional managers there were some questions that were kind of specific to a given project. And the way to get an answer on those is to just shoot an email to the regional manager, who will either engage you in conversation or ask you to submit a pre-proposal or let you know if it's not a fit for the Conservancy funding.
And maybe we could just also answer.
I don't think.
Oh, sorry.
We were not anticipating 300 people, obviously, because that's the limit on our Zoom. And I want to thank you all for joining. And we'll probably have to do this again so the people who didn't get in from the waiting room have a chance. And yeah, feel free to reach out. We're available for questions. Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Okay, Megan, I think we're going to have to, I don't want to close down because we got to get that chat saved and it goes away.
Oh, okay. I'll figure that out.
We need
Oh, I
to-
need to stop. I will stop the recording now. Stopping the recording now.